They say the cruelest wounds are not the ones carved into your body, but the ones carved into your soul by the very people who should protect it. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or studios, but at the family dinner table, where comparisons and dismissals can cut deeper than any knife. So let me ask you, have you ever been told you'll never measure up? That no matter what you achieve, you'll always live in someone else's shadow? Imagine working yourself to exhaustion, sacrificing sleep, dreams, even friendships, just to prove your worth, only to discover the very people you were trying to please had never seen you at all. And worse, that your own brother had secretly stolen not just your money, but 8 years of your life, all to maintain the illusion that he was still the golden child. This is the story of how I learned the most painful truth of all. Family can love you, use you, or betray you. But only you can decide when you've finally had enough. My name is Kira Donovan. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Chicago, where I run a successful boutique graphic design studio. Today, I'm independent, secure, and no longer chained to the constant need for my family's approval. But it wasn't always like this. For most of my life, I was a prisoner in the shadow of my older brother, Mason. From the outside, my childhood looked like a picture-perfect Midwestern dream. We lived in a neatly kept colonial-style house in a leafy suburb outside Minneapolis. White picket fence, cookouts in summer, skiing trips in winter. The perfect American family portrait. At least that's how it looked to our neighbors. Inside those walls, though, was a hierarchy carved so deeply into daily life that it became my reality. Mason, 5 years older than me, was the golden boy. My parents, Robert and Elaine, hung on his every word, applauded his every achievement. Straight-A report cards lined the fridge. Swimming trophies crowded his shelves. Glossy ribbons hung from his wall. Teachers praised his brilliance. Coaches raved about his discipline. Neighbors congratulated his charm and polite manners. To them, he was a prodigy with greatness stamped into his DNA. And me? I became the constant disappointment. "Why can't you be more like Mason?" was the chorus of my childhood. When I brought home a B+ in math, my father sighed. "Your brother never got anything less than an A." When my science fair project collapsed 2 hours before judging, my mother shook her head and muttered, "Mason built a robotic hand at your age. Don't you want to try harder?" Try harder? That became my life's mantra. I learned piano to impress them, practicing until my fingers cramped. After my recital, when I proudly performed Mozart, I overheard my mother whisper to a family friend, "Mason mastered Chopin by that age." I joined art club in high school and won first place for a watercolor competition. Excited, I showed my parents. They responded with distracted nods. "That's nice, dear, but art's a hobby. Your brother is already taking advanced placement, classes that matter." The painting that earned me a ribbon ended up shoved in a closet. Mason's debate team certificates, however, went up in the living room, proudly framed for visitors. It wasn't just my parents. Family gatherings were their own theater of humiliation. At Thanksgiving, relatives swooned over Mason's academic accolades and his latest swimming victory. Then came the obligatory glance in my direction. "And what about you, Kira? Still doodling those little pictures?" they'd ask, as though my aspirations were childish scribbles on a napkin. By the time I hit adolescence, I learned the safest place was in silence. Dinner became an endless monologue about Mason's future, Ivy League ambitions. Whenever I attempted to share something, an essay I'd written, a design I was proud of, the conversation drifted back like a homing pigeon to Mason's brilliance. Eventually, I stopped trying. I learned to swallow my words, excuse myself, and retreat to my room, where my sketchbook became both my audience and my release. In those pages lived entire worlds of color and design, worlds where my worth didn't depend on someone else's shadow. High school hardened me. I realized that, no matter how hard I tried, I would never outshine him in their eyes. So I stopped competing on their terms. Instead, I turned inward, diving deeper into the world of graphic design and visual arts. I haunted the art room after hours, teaching myself digital software, filling portfolio after portfolio. For once, I was creating not for their approval, but for myself. It was thanks to my art teacher, Ms. Thompson, that I found the courage to keep going. She stayed late with me, critiquing drafts, lending me professional design books, even encouraging me to consider art school. "Kira," she said, eyeing one of my poster drafts, "you don't see the world the way most people do. You have vision. Don't let anyone make you believe that's less valuable than numbers in a ledger." Her validation was rare oxygen. In a house where I was invisible, someone finally saw me. The contrast in how my parents celebrated Mason and me couldn't have been clearer when graduation rolled around. For Mason, they threw the kind of party people talk about for years. A tent in the backyard, caterers passing hors d'oeuvres. The whole extended family gathered while my dad delivered a 20-minute toast about his son's bright Ivy League future. For me, 4 years later, my graduation was celebrated with a rushed family dinner at an Olive Garden. No tent, no crowd, no toast. Just a quiet nod after my mother asked if I had heard that Mason landed an internship at Morgan Stanley. When I told them I'd been accepted to Columbia College Chicago to study design, with a scholarship, my father frowned. "That's cute," he said, in the same tone he'd use if I told him I wanted to be a circus clown. "But are you sure about this?" Mason chose economics. Real careers are built from things like that. Graphic arts? It's unstable. You don't want to waste your life. My mother nodded. Offering what she thought was reassurance, she added, "We just want you to have the same stability your brother will. He's already secured his path. We don't want to see you struggle." But struggle I did, just differently than they imagined. Chicago became both my escape and my crucible. With my scholarship covering only part of my tuition, I had to fend for myself entirely. Mason had his tuition fully paid, his apartment furnished, his start cushioned by my parents. I had coffee shifts at dawn, late nights at a print shop, and stale bagels for dinner. What no one realized was that this struggle was shaping me. That cafe taught me grit. That print shop, owned by an old-school designer named Vince, became my workshop. Watching him hand-cut proof sheets, I absorbed lessons not written in textbooks. He saw in me a spark my family had ignored. "You've got a natural eye," he said one night when I helped design a wedding invitation series. "Better instincts than some of the Columbia grads I've met. Stick with it, Kira." For the first time, I was being recognized for my work. Not for being second to Mason, not for failing to meet expectations, but for the quality of what I created. And even though phone calls home were less frequent, when they did happen, the same themes spilled out. Mason's promotions, Mason's new car, Mason's plans with his girlfriend from a wealthy family. My father once chuckled, "Mason's new bonus? Probably more than you'll make in your lifetime doing design." Each jab reinforced what I had already accepted. Their approval was unreachable, so I built quietly in silence, brick by brick, finding mentors, clients, and friends who valued me not in comparison to anyone else, but for the vision only I could bring to the table. And still, in all that silence, I kept a wound hidden. The relentless need for family recognition, the hope that someday my father might look at me and say, "I'm proud of you, Kira." Little did I know that hope would one day be crushed in ways I couldn't even imagine. When I left Minneapolis for Chicago, it was more than just a move. It was an act of survival. For the first time, I could breathe, unshackled from the constant soundtrack of, "Why can't you be more like Mason?" Yet freedom had its own heavy price. I had no safety net. Every meal, every bill, every supply I bought for school came from money I earned myself. While Mason's college years were gilded with privilege, with my parents sending him checks and snapping photos of him at his Ivy League campus, my college. Years were held together with duct tape and stubbornness. I juggled 2 part-time jobs alongside my scholarship. Mornings began at 4:30 a.m., when I'd drag myself to the coffee shop near campus for the opening shift. I brewed endless lattes, smiled through exhaustion, and learned that caffeine was both my paycheck and my lifeline. Afternoons were consumed by classes, digital media, typography, color theory, and then weekends I worked at that print shop, a haven where I secretly felt more like a designer than a student. Nights were for freelance gigs I'd chase down on bulletin boards or small websites, concert posters, wedding invitations, business cards for mom-and-pop restaurants. Every time I wired money from those side hustles into my tuition or rent, I reminded myself, this is for me, my fight, my path. And yet every phone call home reminded me I was still the afterthought. Whenever I called, my mother's voice would burst with excitement before I could say a word. Did you hear? Mason just landed a new internship. He's already catching the eye of senior executives. Or my father would laugh and say, your brother is playing golf with clients this weekend. You might want to learn. That's where real careers are built. I rarely mentioned my own victories. When I was selected to design the poster for a student film festival that hundreds would see, I told them. My mom chuckled politely. Oh, how fun. Hey, your brother just reserved an apartment with a skyline, view in New York. Isn't that impressive? Every achievement of mine evaporated against his never-ending highlight reel. But there were others who saw me. My roommate Leah, a photography major from Seattle, nearly wept when she saw the poster. I designed for the campus festival. Kira, this is stunning. You have such a distinctive style. Everyone else is safe and predictable. You're bold. You're going to make it. It was the kind of praise that felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, but it fed something inside me that had been starved for years. Then there was Professor Damon Rivera. He taught advanced visual communication, and he was notorious for tearing students' work apart. Cold, brutal critiques that could make even the best students slump in defeat. That semester, when he scrutinized my final project, a rebrand of a small nonprofit's entire identity, I braced for the slaughter. But instead he leaned back, rubbed his chin, and said something that changed me. Donovan, I've been teaching for 20 years. Most of these kids, they're competent. He tapped the page of my presentation. You're visionary. You see the hierarchy of design instinctively. I want you to apply for the Meridian Design Summer Program. Few get in, but you should. And to my shock, I did get in. That summer, while Mason was globetrotting with friends from his finance internship, I was in downtown Chicago learning from some of the best designers in the region. Meridian introduced me to real-world clients and practical pressures. They taught me how to fight for my ideas in boardrooms. That summer became a bridge, leading to freelance offers, connections, and confidence I didn't think I could ever have. Every victory I made out there was hard-won. Every design I sold, every client I impressed. It was me, not Mason. And yet, when I called home, the shadow lingered. During my senior year, Professor Rivera featured one of my designs in a faculty exhibition, a huge honor for an undergrad. I called home eagerly. Mom, only 3 students were selected. It's a really big deal. Oh, honey, that's nice. She trailed off quickly. Speaking of big deals, Mason got a bonus at Morgan Stanley last week. Can you imagine? His boss said he's partner material. I hung up that call with tears stinging my eyes. It didn't matter what I accomplished. The narrative was fixed. Mason was brilliance and stability. I was playing with art. Graduation day for me was a bittersweet vacuum. For Mason, my parents had thrown a glamorous backyard party with tents and speeches. For me, a couple of grainy photos my mother snapped before they left early for a trip Mason arranged. I walked across the stage alone. But not truly alone. Leah and her parents cheered loudly from the audience. Vince from the print shop and his wife came with flowers. Professor Rivera beamed with pride when he shook my hand. That night, at a small restaurant in the city, I laughed with friends, mentors, and found family, the people who had chosen me freely, not compared me. That was the night I realized something monumental. I could survive without my parents' approval. I graduated with offers lined up. A boutique agency, Horizon Design, hired me. The salary was modest, but it was stable, and my career officially began. I rented a minuscule studio apartment on the west side of Chicago. A room so small, my desk doubled as a dining table. But it was mine. Those early years were relentless. I learned the art world version of corporate grind. Tight deadlines, picky clients, redoing things because a marketing assistant didn't vibe with the shade of a button. My desk was littered with half-eaten ramen cups and sticky notes crammed with deadlines. Brooklyn loft glamour? Forget it. The reality was fluorescent lights, Craigslist furniture, and a refurbished computer that wheezed under heavy design files. But there was joy amidst the chaos. For every logo rejected, there was one accepted. For every client that asked for something more pop, there was an entrepreneur who called me brilliant. My portfolio grew, my confidence trembled but expanded. Then, 8 months into my first job, I got the phone call that changed everything. "Kira?" My mother's voice wavered down the line. "Your father's sick. They found issues with his heart. He's going to need surgery. Insurance won't cover all of it." For all the resentment I carried, the news hit me like a landslide. My father might have been a man who compared and dismissed me, but he was still my father. And without hesitation, I asked how much. The number she gave me drained my emergency fund to a single-digit balance, but I wired it that night. Family, I told myself, was still family. What I thought was a one-time act of help became a monthly arrangement. His surgery, his medication, the follow-up therapies. I sent $500 every month, sometimes more if another expense cropped up. Half of my rent could vanish in an instant for them. Still, I grit my teeth and hustled harder, took on freelance work after my 9 to 5, sacrificed weekends and sleep. At some point, the voice inside me whispered, "Mason will be helping too, right?" It seemed logical. He was making double, probably. Triple my salary. He had every resource to contribute. When I asked tentatively during a call, silence stretched on the line before my mother sighed. "Oh, honey, Mason is at a crucial stage in his career. He has his mortgage, his country club, plus he's saving for partnership buy-in. He has a lot on his plate." The implication was stunning and cruel. Mason's life was too important to be interrupted. Mine was expendable. And so, the cycle began. Me sacrificing, while Mason luxuriated. Even as they cashed my checks, the comparisons continued. One visit, home, I handed my mother an envelope from an especially lucrative freelance project. She smiled vaguely, then sighed dreamily. "Did you hear? Mason just bought a vacation house in Aspen. He said we can use it anytime. He's always been so thoughtful." Thoughtful? I wanted to scream. Who was actually paying for their lights, their food, their medical bills? Me. But Mason bought them a ski lodge weekend, and he was crowned generous king. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, smiled politely, and went back to work when I returned to the city. If they couldn't see, maybe they never would. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't imagine, was that my sacrifices weren't even reaching them the way I believed. That betrayal, the cruelest one of all, was waiting just a few years down the line. By the 3rd year of sending money home, exhaustion wasn't just a part of me. It had become me. My body screamed with migraines that pulsed like hurricanes behind my eyes. My reflection in the bathroom mirror was always accompanied by dark circles so deep they looked etched in with ink. My friends stopped inviting me to their Friday gatherings because they already knew the answer. I can't. I've got another project deadline. My life was one long cycle of client work, agency work, side hustles, and monthly wire transfers to Minneapolis. And through all of it, Mason was somehow still the sun in which my parents basked. I remember one night vividly. I had been pushing through revisions for a boutique hotel's branding campaign at 2 a.m., eyes gritty with exhaustion, when my phone lit up with a text from my mother. A photo of herself and my father in front of a sparkling fountain at some resort, captioned, "Your brother surprised us with a weekend away. Isn't he wonderful?" Meanwhile, I was sitting in a chair that broke 2 weeks later because I'd bought it secondhand from a thrift shop and tightened the screws with duct tape. There was no mention of the $800 I had wired the same week. Money I had hustled for with a freelance contract designing packaging for a tea company. No acknowledgement, no thank you. Just their endless worship of Mason, the golden sun. The irony stung sharper each month. My parents lived day to day on the funds I provided while Mason swooped in with glamorous, one-off gestures, a vacation, a dinner, a fancy handbag for my mother, and that was what earned him their endless gratitude. I told myself I didn't care. That I was strong enough to handle being unseen as long as I knew I was saving them. But in the quiet hours, when my body hurt too much to keep working, I did care. And the resentment curdled inside me. It intensified when the wedding invitation arrived. The envelope was ivory, thick as cardboard, embossed with gold lettering. Inside, an invitation to Mason's wedding at a sprawling vineyard in Napa Valley. Beneath the swirls of calligraphy was the mocking requirement, black tie only. My stomach dropped as I did the math. Plane ticket, hotel, gown, gift, all totaled, roughly $2,000, the same amount that could cover 3 months of groceries and utilities in my studio apartment. But not going? That wasn't an option. Not unless I wanted to ignite a family scandal and hear forever about how I refused to show up for Mason's biggest day. So, I picked up yet another freelance project. This one designing a 130-page furniture catalog that consumed my weekends and evenings until I forgot what leisure even meant. My credit card groaned under the weight of flights and hotel reservations I had no business booking. I bought the cheapest black dress I could find that still passed as elegant. The wedding itself was obscene in its extravagance. Chandeliers glittered. Like constellations overhead, champagne flowed like water. Centerpieces seemed worth more than my rent. Guests wore gowns that shimmered under candlelight, while a string quartet hummed softly in the distance. My parents, of course, radiated pride. Introducing Mason to everyone, they basked in the glow of his achievement. I, meanwhile, was reduced to, "This is our daughter, Kira. She works with computers and art," something like that. Every time I shook hands with one of Mason's wealthy in-laws, the pitying look in their eyes burrowed into me. Like they knew, just knew, I was the footnote. The lesser Donovan. The breaking point came when I overheard my father speaking to my uncle, Robert, during the reception. His voice was proud, booming over the string music. "Mason's finally secured his future, Robert. This marriage? The partners at the firm are practically family now. He's unstoppable." Robert, bless him, asked almost kindly, "And Kira? How's she doing?" My father's response was a shrug, followed by a dismissive laugh. "Oh, she's still trying to figure things out. You know artists, they're always struggling. But we're hopeful she'll land something more stable eventually." I froze in place like I'd been stabbed. 3 years. 3 years of sending nearly half my salary home. Over those 3 years, I'd eaten discount noodles, skipped vacations, maxed out my credit, worked myself to the bone to pay surgeries, bills, and medication. All so they could live comfortably. And still I was trying to figure things out. That night in my cheap hotel room, I collapsed on the bed, mascara streaking my cheeks as I wept into the thin pillow. I hadn't cried like that in years. But it wasn't just pain. It was realization. I was in a cycle I would never escape if I didn't break it myself. Mason would always be the son. I would always be their afterthought. And even then, even with all that burning inside me, I still sent the next payment. Because family obligation had been hardwired into me since birth, the cycle ground on. But then came a shift I couldn't have imagined. By my 5th year in the industry, my portfolio had grown teeth. Chicago's design community was tight-knit, and word spread fast. Within a year, I went from Horizon Design to a powerhouse agency working with national clients. Contracts flowed from athleisure rebrands to organic grocery chain revamps, to a major airline needing digital campaigns. My name began appearing in design blogs. Invitations to speak at conferences landed in my inbox. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a freelancer scratching for scraps. I was being taken seriously. And that's when I took the scariest leap of my life. Ditching the safety net of agencies and starting my own. Prism Design Studio was born from equal parts desperation and audacity. I rented a small office in a converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, invested in professional-grade equipment, and hired a part-time assistant named Jordan to keep admin from burying me alive. The stakes were terrifying. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made the stupidest mistake of my life. But slowly, something miraculous happened. Former clients followed me. New referrals poured in. By my 1st year, Prism was turning a profit. I was finally, truly standing on my own. And still, every month, I sent that $800 wire home. 8 years. From $500 at the beginning to $800 in later years, I never missed a transfer. Each month, I put aside my own dreams of upgrading my apartment, of expanding my office faster, of maybe buying a proper car. My parents never thanked me beyond a vague, "It's helpful." And each phone call remained devoted to Mason. One call still lingers, stabbing at me. I had just won a prestigious industry award, a big deal. I called them, bursting with excitement. "That's nice, honey," my mom said after a pause. "Oh, before I forget, did you see the photos Mason sent of their new beach house? 4,000 square feet right on the coast. Unbelievable. That wasn't just a knife, it was twisting it deep." My achievement evaporated in the light of his material glow. It was in that moment I stopped telling them about my victories altogether. Why bother? My parents weren't my audience, but fate, in its cruel way, had a bigger reveal in store. One day, after nearly a decade of dutiful transfers, I discovered the truth. I hadn't been supporting my parents at all. The money I bled for, the nights I spent sick with migraines, exhausted, chained to my desk, it had all gone into Mason's pockets. 8 years. Nearly $75,000 siphoned right into the account of the very brother I had been compared to my whole life. The betrayal wasn't just numbers in a bank statement. It was a lifetime of being told I was less, only to realize my so-called golden brother had been stealing from me under the guise of parental duty. And it all started unraveling with a single, unexpected visit home. It began with impulse. After almost a year of nonstop deadlines and client meetings, I finally scheduled a trip back to Minneapolis. A potential client had arranged for a consultation there, and I thought, why not extend it a day? Maybe surprise my parents. I hadn't been home in over a year. And despite everything, a small part of me still craved the warmth of family. I didn't tell them I was coming. I imagined the look of joy on my mother's face when she answered the door. The tears in her eyes when she realized I had taken time out of my busy life to visit without warning. Maybe they would finally see how much I cared. Instead, what greeted me was the unraveling of the last illusion I still held about them. When I pulled into their driveway, the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar SUV parked in front of the garage. Sleek, shiny, far newer than anything I'd ever owned. I frowned, thinking maybe they'd bought a new car, or perhaps a visitor's. Carrying a gift bag in one hand, a bottle of scotch for my father, a silk scarf for my mother, I rang the bell. The door opened, and my mother's face registered, not happiness but shock. "Kira, what are you doing here?" she stammered, clutching the doorframe. Before I could answer, a voice floated from inside. "Mom, who is it?" That voice. Too familiar. It made my skin prickle, and then he appeared. Mason, wearing sweatpants, a mug of coffee in hand, strolling casually into view. Like he belonged there. No, like he lived there. "What's going on?" I asked sharply, looking from him to my parents. "You're visiting? For the weekend?" The silence that followed was thunderous. My father shuffled into the living room, avoiding my eyes. My mother cleared her throat awkwardly. Mason suddenly seemed smaller, more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "Your brother," my father finally admitted, "has been staying with us for a while." "A while?" I echoed. "What does that mean?" Mason swallowed, finally putting down the mug. His usual wall of confidence cracked. "Almost a year," he said quietly. My brain scrambled. That didn't make sense. Mason was the success story. The one with the promotions, the Hamptons vacation home, the marriage that practically screamed status. "What happened?" I demanded. So, the truth spilled out, piece by piece. Mason had lost his job nearly 10 months ago when the firm downsized. Despite his connections, no one wanted to touch him, his reputation soured by politics and tightened markets. His marriage crumbled soon after under financial pressure. His ex-wife, Sophia, had resources, lawyers, and leverage. She stripped his lifestyle assets clean during the divorce, leaving him humbled in a way Mason had never known before. And so, he had slunk back home. The golden child, living with our parents in the very house where he had once been adored like royalty. Sat frozen, gripping the gift bag until the paper handles cut into my palm. Heat surged in my chest. Not because he had failed, not because he was living back with them, but because of what it implied. "Wait," I choked out. "So the money I've been sending every month?" My father blinked. "Money? What money?" My breath caught. 8 years, I said. 8 years of transfers. Every single month. My mother frowned in confusion. "Kira, honey, you sent us that one payment for the surgery years ago. But nothing regular." The room spun. My heartbeat drowned out the ticking clock on the mantel. "That's not true," I said, shaking my head violently. "Every month, I have the receipts. 8 years." And then I saw it. The flicker in Mason's eyes, the subtle freeze across his face. Oh my God. The realization struck like lightning. Mason had been siphoning it. All of it. The joint account. The one I thought was theirs. He had access. He had taken my money, month after month, rerouting it to himself. You. My voice trembled as I pointed at him. It was you. For 8 years. You took everything. He had the gall to look offended. "Don't exaggerate. It wasn't like that." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Not like that. I skipped meals, Mason. I ruined my health. I pushed my career to breaking point because I thought I was saving Mom and Dad, and you were stealing it to keep playing the role of golden boy?" "Kira..." My mother tried to interject, but I didn't let her. "It's true, isn't it?" I snapped. "All those vacations, all those dinners you supposedly treated them to. It was my money. You were building your facade on my back." For once, Mason couldn't hide. His face flushed red, his lips pressed tight. Silence was the loudest confession of all. I could feel my parents' shock spreading like wildfire through the room. My father's hands trembled as he stood and paced to the window. My mother sat heavily on the couch, covering her mouth. "Kira," my father finally said, his voice unsteady. "Do you Do you have proof of this? My laugh came out bitter and broken. Oh, trust me. I have everything. Bank records, transfers. I'll show you whatever you need to see. Mason buried his face in his hands. I didn't mean for it to... I snapped. Stop. Don't you dare say you didn't mean for it to happen. 8 years. You forged signatures. You moved money every chance you got. This wasn't survival. This wasn't desperation. This was theft. The betrayal hit me harder than anything I'd ever faced. It wasn't about $75,000 anymore. It was about everything. The comparisons, the years of being invisible, the sacrifices that were mocked, the constant refrain that I would never be as good. All along, the golden child had been feeding on me like a parasite. The room dissolved into tears, raised voices, and accusations. I stood and walked out before I could break completely. That night, back in my hotel, I sat staring at my computer, scrolling through 8 years of statements. Each line was a knife wound. Each transfer I had thought was an act of loyalty was actually another brick in the fortress of Mason's lie. I made one decision immediately. I was done. No more wires. No more silent suffering. But another decision crystallized just as sharp. I wouldn't let this sit as a private family drama. Mason had stolen from me. He had stolen years of security, opportunity, health, independence. There had to be consequences. So I hired an investigator. Trevor Miles was his name. A private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. He looked over my case with a calm, precise eye. This is more common than you might think, he said. Financial manipulation within families. It thrives in secrecy, but we can trace it cleanly. 3 weeks later, he handed me a folder thick with damning evidence. Forged checks, dates and transfers. A clear map following every penny I had sent, all draining like clockwork from a joint account into Mason's personal one. Based on what I've compiled, Trevor said, your brother took roughly $75,000 over 8 years. Every cent is traceable. You have an airtight case if you want to press charges. When I looked at the total, fury surged so hot I thought it would scorch me alive. $75,000 that could have been a down payment on a house. That could have upgraded my business. That could have bought me back years of freedom I lost under the crushing weight of his theft. But more than the numbers, it was knowing my suffering had been a performance he let drag on, just so he could keep wearing a crown he hadn't earned. I booked my flight back to Minneapolis again. This time, there would be no warm intentions, no gift bags. I planned to cut the mask open and make everyone see the truth for what it was. In my mind, I rehearsed the confrontation. No more polite silence. No more letting Mason control the narrative. For once in my life, I held the power. Not my father, not my mother, and certainly not my brother. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about reclaiming every ounce of dignity he had stolen. And I was ready to see the golden boy's shine finally crack into dust. The second time I drove to my parents' house in Minneapolis, there was nothing sentimental in my chest. No nervous hope that they'd smile when I walked through the door. No lingering dream of finally being their celebrated child. Only fire. Pure, sharpened fury. I arrived with a binder in my bag. Inside it, 8 years' worth of bank statements, carefully highlighted, investigator reports, and copies of forged signatures Mason had used to drain me dry. Evidence thick enough to bury him. When my mother opened the door, she flinched just slightly. Not at me, but at the sight of determination carved into my face. This wasn't the daughter who shrank under comparisons. This was someone who had bled and was done bleeding. "Kira," she whispered, voice uncertain. "We didn't know." "You'll know now," I cut in, brushing past her into the living room. The family was assembled like they had sensed a reckoning was coming. My father sat stiff in his recliner, arms crossed. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. And Mason. Mason looked pale, but still trying to maintain an aura of control, like a CEO accused in front of shareholders but hoping the company's reputation would bail him out. I dropped the binder on the coffee table with a thud that made everyone jump. For 8 years, I began, my voice cold and steady. I thought I was supporting you. I thought every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night, every ounce of security I gave up, was to keep this family safe. But I wasn't supporting you. I was funding him. I jerked my chin toward Mason. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. My father frowned, suspicion clouding his stern features. "What proof do you have of such an accusation?" he asked carefully. I flipped open the binder, pages spread like an autopsy report. Bank statements. Every transfer I made, from $500 to $800 a month, highlighted. Next to them, traces of those funds being rerouted within days into Mason's personal accounts. Here, copies of checks with your signature forged, Dad, in Mason's handwriting. And here, notarized verification from the bank investigator. Every single transfer proves one thing. Mason has been stealing. The silence was suffocating. My mother's trembling hands reached forward. She lifted one page, her breath hitching as she compared her husband's neat signature to the sloppier, practiced forgery Mason had scribbled. Her face paled as the truth crashed into her. "Tell me this isn't true," my father demanded, turning sharply to Mason. His eyes, usually brimming with unshakable pride, flickered with betrayal. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence told us everything. "Enough," I snapped when I saw him forming excuses. "No more lies. For 8 years, while I lived on noodles and maxed out my cards to keep my studio alive, you were feeding on me like a parasite. And you let Mom and Dad believe I didn't care. You painted me as selfish even as you were pocketing every transfer I made." "No," my mother gasped, tears brimming. "All those dinners, those vacations he invited us on." Her voice broke. "It was your money, wasn't it? All those years it was Kira's generosity, not Mason's." The golden boy's mask cracked. Mason buried his face in his hands, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to spiral out of control." "That's horse shit," I snapped. "You didn't stumble into this. You made deliberate forgeries. You knowingly siphoned money. It wasn't desperation. It was entitlement. You enjoyed playing the role of savior while I was literally working myself into the ground." My father stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His shoulders shook in a way that startled me, like I was watching him crumble into someone fragile. "All these years," he whispered hoarsely. "We thought you were selfish, Kira. We believed Mason when he said you were too wrapped up in your art to care." He spun back toward Mason, his voice splintering. "You lied about your own sister while stealing from her. From us." His voice cracked into something I'd never heard before from him. Grief. I'd grown up on this man's harsh assessments, his endless comparisons, his sighs that I was never enough. To watch his face carve into lines of regret was surreal, almost cruel to witness now after years of yearning for it. Mason tried again, a pathetic defense. "I told myself I'd pay it back. I just needed time to rebuild. I lost so much. My career, my marriage, my home." I cut him off, venom dripping through every word. "And I lost sleep, opportunities, health. 8 years of sacrificing my future so you could keep pretending you were still the successful one." I leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "You didn't lose anything, Mason. You stole, and you lied." My mother sobbed openly now. "How could you, Mason? How could you do that to your own sister?" For once, there was no defense in his eyes, no charm he could summon. He looked small, like a child caught cheating on a test. "Because," his voice trembled, "because I couldn't let go of being the one you loved. I couldn't be the failure while she succeeded. I was terrified of being second. His words landed like ash falling in a cold wind. So that was it. The golden child hadn't been golden at all, just desperate, terrified, and willing to destroy me to preserve a false crown. "What happens now?" my mother whispered, looking helplessly between me, Mason, and my father. I steadied my voice, pulling out another folder Trevor had prepared. "What happens now is accountability. First, Mason signs this statement acknowledging every cent he took and how. Second, he agrees to a repayment plan. I don't care if it takes the rest of his life. He will repay it. And third, I turned my gaze on my parents. We stop pretending. The comparisons end. I'm not your afterthought anymore." My father moved forward, taking the folder from me with hands that trembled as he flipped through page after damning page. Then he turned to Mason, his face carved from stone. "You sign this," he said quietly, "and you live with what you've done." Mason stared at the papers, tears dripping onto the ink. "I'll sign. I'll pay it back, I swear." His voice cracked, stripped of arrogance, stripped of charm. I knelt to pack my binder, my chest tight but resolute. I had waited my entire life for acknowledgement, for recognition, for someone in that house to say, "Kira, you matter." And although that moment had come in the ugliest way imaginable, it was here. They could never again pretend not to see me. Before I left, my father, this man who had spent decades telling me I wasn't enough, raised his eyes to mine. His voice was raw, weighted with shame. "We failed you," he said simply. "Not just by letting this happen, but by never seeing your light when it was in front of us. We were blind, but not anymore. Kira, we see you now." The part of me that had craved those words since I was 6 years old wanted to weep. But another part, stronger now, whispered bitterly, "Too late." I nodded once, coldly, and left. The next days blurred as Mason put ink to signatures, as Trevor finalized reports, as my parents called me in tears begging to know how to make amends. But the truth was cemented. Their golden boy had stolen $75,000 over 8 years. And me, the child who was always told she was less, had been the one keeping the family alive all along. As I boarded the plane back to Chicago, I gazed out the window. A bittersweet ache coiled deep inside me. This was not a triumph. This was not revenge. It was survival, but survival with scars carved deep. What I didn't yet realize was that it was also the beginning of transformation. Because once you've seen the truth, you can never unsee it. And once you've reclaimed your power, there is no giving it back. The days after my confrontation in Minneapolis felt strangely still, like standing in a house after a fire has burned through, when the smoke has cleared, but the damage remains, hauntingly visible. The truth had scorched everything. Mason signed the admission statement prepared by Trevor, the investigator. Every forgery, every transfer, every theft was carefully documented, with his signature sitting beneath the words. I acknowledge and accept responsibility for the unauthorized use of funds provided by my sister, Kira Donovan, from 2014 to 2022. His name on those pages was both a victory and a tragedy. Victory because finally, 8 years of silent suffering had been proven. Tragedy because it was proof that my own brother had turned betrayal into a second career. But signatures didn't erase damage. They didn't heal 8 years of exhaustion, bitterness, and silence. And they didn't return what had been stolen. That's when my parents made a choice I hadn't expected. They filed a police report. I hadn't asked them to. Honestly, I wasn't sure I even wanted them to. But after reviewing Trevor's evidence and Mason's signed statements, they told me it was the only way. "This isn't just your fight, Kira," my father said solemnly when he phoned me later. "This was a betrayal of all of us. He lied to us, too. He dragged our family through lies for years. Hearing him say that was surreal. The man who had once dismissed my art as a silly distraction was finally acknowledging not only my struggle, but Mason's deception. Maybe it was shame, maybe remorse, maybe both. But for once, there was no comparison on his tongue. The legal process moved quickly. Mason was charged with fraud and forgery. Because the theft happened within family and restitution was already being discussed, the court didn't push for jail. Instead, he accepted a plea deal, probation, community service, and a formal restitution plan requiring him to repay what he stole in full. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the record. Proof burned into the system forever. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was a fraud. Watching Mason in court, I was struck by how small he seemed in the sterile courtroom light. Without his polished suits and his bragging speeches, he was just a man hunched at a defense table, ashamed. I thought I'd feel triumphant seeing him fall. Instead, I felt hollow. Because despite everything, a part of me still wished he had been the brother I needed. The bigger challenge wasn't the court. It was home. My parents, shaken beyond recognition, tried something that shocked me. Therapy. They asked if I would join. "We need to learn how we got here," my mother said one evening on the phone, her voice fragile in a way I'd never heard. "We failed you, Kira. We failed Mason, too. We need help. Will you sit with us?" If you had told 20-year-old me that my parents would ever step inside a therapist's office, I would have laughed. But now, I agreed. Not because I thought it would fix everything overnight, but because I needed answers too. So, for the first time in my life, I sat across from them in a neutral office, under the calm gaze of Dr. Harper, a family therapist, with soft eyes and a direct voice. The sessions cracked open truths I hadn't dared imagine I'd hear my parents speak aloud. I always admired Mason, because he reflected the life I thought I wanted. My father admitted one day, wringing his hands, something I'd never seen him do. Stability, finance, power. It was easy to measure everything by those standards. Kira's path? I didn't understand it, so I dismissed it. That was my failure. My mother's tears came in rivers during those sessions. I encouraged the comparisons because I thought they would motivate you, she confessed, looking at me with wet eyes. I thought if I pushed you toward Mason's example, you'd find the same success. But I only pushed you further into pain. I sat across from them, silent, listening. Every word was both knife and balm. Pain, because these confessions were years too late. Healing, because they were finally seeing me not as Mason's lesser, but as Kira. For the first time, I said the words I had swallowed for decades. "Do you know what it feels like?" I asked them, voice trembling. "To live in a house where your every victory is a footnote? To starve for acknowledgement while someone else's achievements take over every meal, every holiday, every sentence?" They hung their heads, shame clinging to them. Therapy didn't erase the wound, but at least we'd stopped pretending it wasn't there. Mason, meanwhile, left Minneapolis altogether. It was part of the plan, a fresh start, far away, working at a tiny financial firm in Seattle. Smaller paychecks, tarnished reputation, and every month a repayment check addressed to me. To his credit, he never missed one. It was a far cry from the luxury he once flaunted, but maybe that was the point. He couldn't fake golden anymore. As for me, without the monthly burden of sending money I now knew hadn't reached my parents, I felt freer than I had in years. The weight lifted in ways I hadn't expected. My migraines lessened. My appetite returned. Nights that were once filled with late freelancing became time to actually breathe. Prism design thrived under that freedom. With renewed energy, I secured contracts I wouldn't have dared pursue before. National campaigns, museum exhibitions, collaborations with major brands. I expanded the studio, hired 2 more designers, and even upgraded to a larger loft-like office. For the first time, instead of pouring my energy into sustaining others, I was investing in me. Recognition followed. Awards, interviews, industry panels where my name was listed alongside designers I had once admired from afar. And each time, I thought bitterly, if only they could see me now. And they did. 6 months after therapy began, my parents visited Chicago for the first time since I'd moved there over a decade earlier. I gave them a tour of Prism, the walls lined with past campaigns, the desks buzzing with young designers, the awards shimmering under the track lights. My father walked through slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, pausing at each framed design. He nodded, not with the distracted dismissal I grew up with, but with genuine awe. "This is incredible," he murmured. "You built this." He finally looked at me fully, eyes shining with something I had chased my whole life. "I underestimated you. I see that now. You've accomplished more on your own than I ever gave you credit for." My mother, staring at a brand campaign I had led for a children's literacy nonprofit, wiped tears from her cheeks. "We missed so much. We never really saw you, Kira, until now." Dinner that evening was quiet, emotional. At one point, my father lifted his glass with trembling fingers. "To Kira," he said, voice thick, "who succeeded not because of us, but in spite of us. We are proud of you, not for your work, but for who you are." Even hearing those words, years too late, cracked me open. All the years of craving their recognition left scars that wouldn't simply vanish. But that night, something shifted. For once, the toast wasn't about Mason. For once, it was about me. I learned something crucial through all of it. My worth was never theirs to define. Not my father's, not my mother's, and certainly not Mason's. My value existed whether they saw it or not. Therapy taught me one more thing. Forgiveness isn't offered once. It's chosen daily, in small steps. My relationship with my parents wasn't magically healed, but it was real now, built on truth, not illusions. And with Mason, well, our conversations were tentative, cautious. But occasionally, I glimpsed honesty from him. He admitted once on the phone, "I think I always envied how authentic you were. I was too busy pretending to ever build something real." I didn't forgive him fully, not then. Maybe not ever. But for the first time, I believed he was trying. And me? I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. I wasn't Mason's sister, the artist still struggling. I was Kira Donovan, an entrepreneur, designer, mentor, and woman who had clawed her way out of a shadow that once seemed permanent. But the story wasn't finished yet, because the hardest lesson remained. Sometimes family can change, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes love is real, and sometimes it's manipulation dressed as loyalty. And I had to choose carefully what and who I carried forward. Success changes you, but not always in the ways people assume. After the confrontation, after therapy began, after Prism Design started spreading its wings in the Chicago creative scene, I felt myself growing into someone I barely recognized. No longer the girl who tiptoed around family conversations, terrified of being compared. No longer the woman who wired half her paycheck each month out of guilt. No longer the invisible child at the dinner table drowned out by her brother's achievements. For the first time, I was undeniable. By my 7th year in Chicago, Prism had grown from a scrappy dream with secondhand equipment into a recognized design studio with a reputation for boldness. Our work appeared in national campaigns. Our pitches won competitive contracts against larger firms, and younger designers came to us because they wanted to learn in an environment that celebrated creativity without ego. Walking into my office became a daily affirmation. Prism's loft-style studio in the West Loop buzzed with energy. Assistants scribbling concepts on whiteboards, designers huddled around glowing monitors, interns peppering me with questions. On the walls hung awards, framed magazine features, and projects I was immensely proud of. For the first time, I was no longer just hustling for survival. I was mentoring others, shaping a team, building something that lived beyond me. And yet, behind that shine, the shadows of my family still loomed. Mason called about 2 months after his relocation to Seattle. It was a cautious call, a man testing the terrain, unsure if the ground beneath him would hold. "Kira," he said quietly. His voice lacked the bravado, the smug edge that used to coat every word. "I just wanted you to know. I started my repayment schedule today. The first deposit should already be in your account. It's slow, I know, but I promised I'd do it." I checked my bank later. A modest $200 transfer was waiting. For a man who had once siphoned thousands, it seemed small. But for the first time, it was money flowing in the right direction. "Thank you," I said simply. Silence lingered on the line before Mason sighed. "I'm in therapy too. The counselor says, I need to stop hiding behind being the golden boy. That entire identity was killing me. I pretended to be successful long after I wasn't, and when I couldn't keep up, I stole from you instead of admitting I'd failed." His words felt fragile, almost childlike. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut, years of resentment rising like bile. But another quieter part recognized that exposure was the first step toward change. "I hear you," I said carefully. "But hearing and trusting are different things. It'll take time. Don't expect me to forget what happened." "I don't," he admitted. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want the chance to try." Over the following months, we began speaking. Not regularly, not comfortably, but openly. Conversations that once would have been shallow comparisons now turned into awkward but real talks. Mason shared about his tiny apartment in Seattle, his humiliating but humbling entry-level role at a financial firm much smaller than the powerhouse he'd once boasted about. He confessed nights of loneliness, of staring at ceilings, and realizing he'd destroyed both his family relationships and his marriage, chasing an identity that wasn't even his dream. I didn't absolve him, but I listened. Sometimes that was scarier than yelling. Meanwhile, therapy with my parents unfolded slowly. Weekly calls that were once about Mason's achievements now circled carefully around accountability and reflection. They admitted to years of favoritism, of blind spots, of ignoring my cries for recognition. My father admitted something that struck me deeply one session. "I think I was always harshest with you when you reminded me of my own vulnerabilities," he confessed awkwardly. "Your creativity scared me. I didn't know how to measure it, so I dismissed it. Mason was easier to understand. We failed you." I wanted to scream that this realization came a decade too late, but instead, I let the silence hang heavy and simply said, "Acknowledging it now doesn't erase it." "No," he agreed. "But maybe it can stop it from continuing." The sessions didn't fix years of pain, but they began rewriting a narrative I thought would never change. The comparisons faded from their conversations. They asked about my work not in passing, but with curiosity. They complimented my campaigns, even attended an exhibition of Prism's design work when visiting Chicago, standing awkwardly in a crowd of younger professionals, but smiling genuinely at the applause. It was a small step, but for once, I wasn't invisible to them. Still, fragility lived beneath every interaction with Mason. 8 months after his repayments began, we met in person for the first time since the confrontation. He flew into Chicago on business and asked if we could meet. Against my instinct, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe on a rainy Sunday. When he arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. His designer suits had been replaced with off-the-rack attire. His hair was slightly longer, less styled. There was no expensive watch flashing on his wrist. For once, Mason looked like just a man. Not a pedestal, not a fraud, just human. "Kira," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from me, his eyes brimmed with nerves. "You look incredible, chic, confident, like you own the world." "I own my studio," I said dryly. "And that's enough." He smiled bitterly. "Yeah, and you earned every ounce of it. I didn't." For 2 hours, Mason laid himself bare. He admitted to jealousy he never acknowledged before. "It's twisted," he said, staring at his untouched coffee. "I envied you. How you stayed authentic. How you built something real without help. I wanted the applause but didn't want the work. So instead, I just took from you." Those words gutted me, not because they were new, but because they were honest. "I'll never forgive the 8 years you stole," I told him bluntly. "But maybe, eventually, I can forgive the brother who admits to it instead of the fraud who denied it." He nodded, tears threatening. "That's all I can ask." We sat in silence after that, rain smearing the windows, listening to the hum of the cafe. It wasn't comfortable, but it was progress. Afterward, walking back through the city streets, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was an ongoing negotiation with yourself. Some days you offer it, some days you withhold it. But its possibility is what keeps you from hardening into bitterness that will eat you alive. Meanwhile, Prism soared. Clients who once saw me as a quirky, independent designer now approached with reverence. I was invited to keynote a design conference in New York. My campaigns were shortlisted for international awards, and young designers sought me out saying, "I want to be where you are in 10 years." That, to me, was the sweetest justice. Not Mason's downfall. Not even my parents' newfound humility. But knowing that other people looked to me the way I once looked to others. That the cycle of invisibility ended with me. Still, at night, when the world quieted, the scars remained. The betrayal didn't vanish. Mason's theft occasionally haunted my dreams. But each time I looked around my studio, each time I heard a client say, "We chose you because we trust you," those scars felt less like wounds and more like proof of survival. By the end of that year, my life felt unrecognizable compared to a decade earlier. No more ramen on a Craigslist desk. No more desperate wires draining my accounts. No more shadow of Mason eclipsing my worth. I was Kira Donovan, resilient, independent, seen at last. And though the family ties were frayed, though forgiveness remained tentative, I finally understood. Family isn't just blood. Family is the people who choose to see you, even when you're invisible. The ones who stand beside you when everyone else turns away. And I was finally learning to choose myself. Closure is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive in one thrilling moment, like a door dramatically slamming shut. It doesn't come with applause, or even with neat resolution tied in a bow. Closure is quieter than that, more like waves pulling in and pulling back, until suddenly you realize the tide has changed. For months after the confrontation and those raw therapy sessions, my life existed in two parallel worlds. One was the buzzing vitality of Prism design, my studio expanding rapidly, new clients signing on, recognition landing in magazines and conferences. The other was the halting, fractured rebuilding of my family dynamic, each conversation testing whether the wounds could really scar over or whether they'd stay open forever. With Prism, everything bloomed. Word spread fast through Chicago's design circles. Call Prism if you want something different, something gutsy. We weren't the agency for the timid. We were the agency people called when they wanted risk, innovation, or a campaign that would linger in the public eye like a song stuck in your head. I thrived on the rush. I spent days at the studio, nights sketching concepts on my apartment walls until they looked like collages of chaotic genius. My team doubled in size. We moved to a brighter, sprawling loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and open white space that buzzed with collaboration. But family, well, that was slower work. My parents called more often now, but the tone had changed. Instead of leading every conversation with Mason, they actually started asking about my projects. "How did the presentation go?" my mom asked once. She even watched a live stream of me keynoting at a design conference and texted, "You looked so confident. We're proud of you." I stared at that text for a full 10 minutes, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Because even if those words were years late, even if the little girl inside me whispered bitterly that they should have come when I was 15 clutching a watercolor ribbon, still they meant something. My father had softened dramatically too. Retirement was creeping closer, his health still fragile, and for the first time, he showed uncertainty in who he was without Mason's triumphs to brag about. "You know," he admitted during one call, "I never understood design as a business. I thought it was fluff. But when I walked into your studio, I realized I was wrong. You built something real, more real than I ever gave you credit for." It wasn't absolution, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is often all a scarred heart ever wants. And Mason, my brother, was both the hardest and the strangest piece of the puzzle. Each month, his repayment checks landed faithfully. Small steps toward restitution, each one a tiny reminder of what had been stolen, but also proof he was at least following through. But the real shock came from our conversations. Gone was the arrogance, the effortless charm. In its place was humility, sometimes awkward, sometimes heavy with shame. He didn't play the victim. He admitted his failures. More than once he muttered, "I don't think I'll ever deserve forgiveness, but I want to earn back whatever scraps of trust I can." I didn't offer comfort. I didn't rush forgiveness. But in small ways, I gave him what I'd always wanted from him: honesty. When we met for coffee or talked on the phone, I told him frankly about the damage, about the nights of exhaustion, about the years of invisibility. And unlike before, he didn't deflect. He just listened, and sometimes he cried. I envied you, he confessed once. All those years you thought I was the golden one. But I was jealous of how authentic you were. You built from nothing. I clung to appearances. When they fell apart, I imploded. Instead of owning the crash, I stole. That's who I became, and I hate it. Hearing him say that was like looking at him for the first time without filters. Mason, human. Not golden, not monstrous. Just human. Deeply flawed, deeply broken. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it gave shape to it. And strangely, it gave me peace. One of the most meaningful steps came during a visit my parents made to Chicago nearly 2 years after the confrontation. They wanted to see Prism again, this time not as tourists in my world, but as genuinely curious participants. They sat in my studio, met my designers, watched my team brainstorm a campaign with wild sketches and laughter bouncing around the loft. For the first time, I saw pride in their eyes that wasn't filtered through comparison. Afterward, at dinner, my father raised his glass slowly and said, "Kira, you succeeded because you believed in yourself even when we didn't. And for that we'll always regret failing you. We can't undo the past. But please know this. Now we see you." My mother nodded, tears sliding down her face as she added softly, "You didn't need to be like Mason. You were always enough exactly as you are. Do you know what it feels like to hear words you've waited decades for? To have the validation you once begged and cried for, when you finally no longer need it. It's like rain falling on scorched earth, not enough to undo the fire, but enough to let something new grow." I didn't forgive everything that night, but I let down a weight I'd been carrying so long it felt fused to my bones. And I let myself enjoy dessert with my parents without bitterness clinging to every bite. Back at Prism, my sense of identity shifted too. I became not just a designer, but a leader. I began speaking more openly to my team about resilience, about what it means to carve your own path. I mentored interns, many of them who, like me, came from households that never quite understood the arts. Their wide eyes when I told them, "Your dream matters, even if your family doesn't see it," reminded me of who I had once been, and of who I'd become. That, more than awards or contracts, felt like justice, the cycle ending with me. But forgiveness stayed complicated with Mason. One day, during another awkward coffee catch-up, Mason said something that stuck like glue. "I know my name will always be attached to the worst betrayal of your life. I can't change that. But maybe I can live the rest of my life making sure I never let you down again." He swallowed, voice cracking. "Not golden. Just your brother. Nothing else." It was the first time in decades he had defined himself without pedestal or excuse. And for the first time in decades, I wanted to believe him. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. Scars don't vanish just because apologies fill the air. Trust is built in years and broken in minutes, but I'm learning to accept the gray. He can be guilty, repentant, broken, and still deserving of a chance to show he can be better. What mattered most was that I finally truly believed I was enough, with or without him, with or without their approval. Closure didn't mean perfect reconciliation. It meant I was no longer desperate for recognition I had already built for myself. It meant I could finally breathe without choking on comparisons. It meant that whether or not my parents or Mason continued to grow, I had already freed myself, and, God, was that freedom sweet. That realization came late one evening, standing alone in Prism's loft, gazing at the glowing skyline of Chicago through the windows while my team's sketches littered the desks. I whispered to myself, "You're here, you did it." And for the first time, I no longer wished Mason or my parents could hear it too, because I didn't need them to. 18 months after the truth came to light, standing in the center of Prism's gleaming studio, I realized that although the wounds my family left behind would always exist, they no longer owned me. They were just scars now, proof that I'd survived. Some nights, I still remembered the exhaustion. The late hours working on freelance projects by a dim lamp, the migraines, the loneliness that clung to me like a second skin. I remembered wiring those transfers every month, convinced I was saving my parents while I was unknowingly bankrolling Mason's facade. For years, I told myself the sacrifice was love. But sacrifice without acknowledgement, without honesty, is nothing more than exploitation. Knowing the truth had been brutal, but it had also been liberating. Because after the fire, when everything I thought I knew about my family burned to ash, I built myself from the ground up, and in my ashes, I never let them bury me. Prism had grown into something bigger than I'd ever dared dream. What began as a rented office and borrowed equipment was now a leading design studio featured in industry magazines, landing major campaigns, mentoring a whole new generation of artists. For years, I believed my worth only existed if my parents finally praised me. Now I understood. My worth was in every client who trusted me, every young designer I encouraged, every piece of art that existed, because I dared to keep creating, and My family? My parents changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. They came to more therapy sessions than I expected. They stopped calling every conversation Mason first. They made the effort to engage with who I really was, asking questions, complimenting my milestones sincerely. The distance that once smothered us narrowed, not erased, but narrowed. The echo of comparisons never entirely disappeared, but now, when I visited Minneapolis or they traveled to Chicago, I no longer felt like a stranger in my own family. And Mason, perhaps the most complicated chapter of all, remained a fractured work in progress. His repayment checks kept arriving, never late. Whenever his name flashed on my phone, I still felt that sting, but I answered anyway. Our conversations were clumsy, scarred, but also stripped down, no longer coated with condescension. I'll never forget one afternoon, when we met again for coffee in Chicago. He was quieter now, more grounded. I know there's nothing I can do to undo what I took, he told me, eyes steady. But Kira, every time I see you or hear about your work, I realize you never needed to be in my shadow. You were always brighter than me. I just spent years making sure no one could see it. His voice cracked. And I'm sorry for that. Truly. Hearing those words didn't erase the stolen years, but it did something else. It let me finally breathe without anger cracking open inside my chest. Forgiveness isn't one door you step through. It's a hallway of doors, some you open, some you close. Mason and I are somewhere in that hallway. Some days the door is cracked open, some days it's shut tight. But I've accepted that living in that hallway is better than staying trapped in the prison of rage forever. The clearest sign of my transformation came during a lecture I gave at a conference for young creatives. After my keynote, a young woman approached me, clutching a sketchbook. She said softly, "My parents think art is a waste of time. They compare me to my older sister every day. Listening to you, it gives me hope." Her words broke me in ways Mason never could. Because in her eyes, I saw the girl I once was, the invisible, dismissed child trying to prove she mattered. And in that moment, I understood the thread connecting every chapter of my life. I went through hell to become the person young creatives could look at and whisper, "If she survived, maybe I can too." That was the real victory. Not Mason's collapse. Not even my parents' belated recognition. But becoming the light for someone else still locked in shadows. Standing alone at Prism's loft one evening, the city of Chicago glowing outside the windows, I finally whispered to myself, "You're enough." And for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to say it back. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Family is not defined by blood. Blood betrayed me. Blood stole from me. Blood like Mason taught me that sometimes envy and fear can rot the people who are supposed to love you most. But the guai, real family, the kind that saves you, is the people who choose you. My professors believed in me, my mentors, my team at Prism, my friends who walked beside me while I rebuilt. They saw me when I thought I was invisible, and their love chipped away at the lies until I finally saw myself. If you've been compared, your whole life, overlooked, dismissed, or betrayed, let me tell you this plain and simple. Your worth is not defined by anyone who refuses to see it. Your worth is in you. It always has been. And if your family hasn't said it, if your parents haven't acknowledged it, if your siblings have stolen from you, hear it from me. You are enough exactly as you are. And maybe, just maybe, I had to go through that shadow to find my light. Because now, at 32, I'm not Kira, the lesser Donovan. I'm Kira, the designer, the leader, the survivor, the woman who rebuilt herself and chose a healthier kind of family. And you can choose that too. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever faced envy or painful comparisons within your family, if you've ever felt diminished by the very people who were supposed to love you, then share your experience in the comments. I promise, someone else who is struggling will find strength in what you have to say. And if you want to hear more true stories of betrayal, survival, and triumph, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs reminding. Family isn't always blood. The ones who choose you are the ones who matter most.